in different contexts as we process different sounds and so on. A lot of our work is driven through audiology and hearing science. So we come from that thread or that stream of research. We are not coming from clinical psychology. We're coming more from audiology. We also do a lot of behavioral studies and survey studies. For instance, we published a few years ago a survey study on college students and the prevalence of misophonia in that population. Okay. So this is the paper that I was asked to discuss. This is altered intrinsic brain connectivity in misophonia with and without hyperacusis. And we'll parse all pieces of it. I did want to give a shout out to Shagun Ajmera, who is a PhD student and who led the analysis and writing of this important piece of work. And then Namita Jain and Gibim Kim were the audiologists who collected a lot of the audiological data. Ariana Castro, at that time, was a clinical psychology PhD student who did the structured clinical interviews on all the participants. And Professor Howard Berenbaum is in the Department of Psychology, and he's a clinical psychologist with over 30 years of experience, who was our partner in this enterprise. Okay. Um, so let me begin. I thought that given this venue, I'll explain a little bit about why are we studying both hyperacusis and misophonia. Our focus was on misophonia. This project is supported by a grant from the Misophonia Research Fund, for instance, and we wanted to understand the commonalities and differences between these two disorders. So let me talk about how we view this. We view this within this big umbrella of sound tolerance disorders. So within this big umbrella where an everyday sound has profound psychological impact on the individual, right? The same sound on one, but not on the other. So this is where it becomes very interesting and also very complicated, right? It's an exact same sound, but it has very different um, processing and very different impact on different individuals. So some of the more common sound tolerance disorders are misophonia, hyperacusis, phonophobia, and noise sensitivity. So misophonia, we know this very well, right? The audience here knows this extremely well. So clicking, dripping, ticking, a lot of orofacial movements produce sounds that have this profound effect on the individual, and that even when they are very soft, right? When they are not very loud. As against this, the hallmark of hyperacusis, especially loudness hyperacusis, is that everyday sounds, which can be soft, are extremely bothersome or painful or sort of noxious to people. So these are sounds like lawn mowers, maybe a metro or train sound, car honking, even music, for instance, right? So that comes under the umbrella of hyperacusis. Uh, so today we'll be talking a lot about misophonia and hyperacusis, but I just wanted to alert you that there are other sound tolerance disorders. One is phonophobia. This is sort of this fear of sounds, and typically you see this in acute phases, sometimes coupled with migraine, for instance. The next one is this noise sensitivity. You are extremely sensitive to noises, not necessarily human speech or not necessarily music, but you are extremely sensitive to noise. So this is in contrast with hyperacusis. All right, so I just wanted to give you that. So as always, we try to begin with some definitions, and uh, the term itself, as we know, was coined by Pavel and Margaret Yastreboff in 2001, but audiologists have been treating some version of this for even prior to that. But and even like clinical psychologists and psychiatrists as well. But we had a term that people really it resonated with them, but the definition itself didn't resonate as much. So in 2022, a group of 17 researchers came together and they came up with this consensus definition of misophonia. So it is a disorder of decreased tolerance to specific sounds or stimuli associated with such sounds. These stimuli, known as triggers, are experienced as unpleasant or distressing and tend to evoke strong negative emotional, physiological, and behavioral responses that are not seen in other people. Right? So that's one way. So let's turn to defining hyperacusis. Um, so hyperacusis has also been known for a while. So Jack Vernon is a very famous audiologist who's done a lot of work with tinnitus and hyperacusis. And he came up with this definition in 1987. It's this unusual tolerance to ordinary environmental sounds, that it is very uh, it's not the same as others. So, right, 20 people around you will not say, oh, that's too loud. But you will, the one who has hyperacusis. So it's that kind. So I wanted to bring this little piece here. There was a published paper in 2019 about the top 10 hyperacusis research priorities. And there they were also defining hyperacusis. And here it says it's a reduced tolerance or increased sensitivity to everyday sounds, whereby they become intense and overwhelming. And you want to leave the room, or you want to ask people to turn down the music when you're eating in a restaurant, for instance, right? I thought you know quite a bit about misophonia. Let me tell you a little bit about hyperacusis. It's about 3.7% of children and about 9.2% of the adults in the world. It's highly more prevalent in certain populations, such as Williams syndrome and autism spectrum disorders. People can feel pain with it. This is rare, thankfully rare. They can feel intense pain with it. There's fear, there's avoidance behavior, there is impairment to quality of life, there is reduced ability to work. And so you can see some sort of overlap with misophonia here as well. Um, Classroom settings are challenging for children with hyperacusis because they find the other children too loud, right? Cafeteria in elementary schools are too loud for them, for instance. So Rich Tyler, who is a clinical audiologist, but also, he has done research for over 40 years on tinnitus and hyperacusis, proposed this framework where he said it can be divided into four parts or four subtypes, which is loudness, annoyance, fear, and pain. And to him, misophonia fits within between somewhere between annoyance and fear, right? So in his framework, that's where it comes in. So I just wanted to alert you that this is what the literature is telling us, and then we go forward. Okay. Okay, so there are, of course, gaps in knowledge here, right? So misophonia and hyperacusis have been studied as though they are very different disorders, different conditions. And typically we think of hyperacusis as stemming from bottom-up auditory hyperactivity. That is, something is making us amplify the incoming sounds, right? So there is a central gain theory, which says that anything that is coming in, we're multiplying it and making it louder, right? Those of us who suffer from hyperacusis, and I have to tell you right now that I suffer from hyperacusis, so that's why I keep saying so I'm sort of including myself in that group. Um, then in misophonia, there is this sort of more learned higher order emotional regulation processes and perhaps social processes. So we think of it as more top down, right? That is a very um, reductionist way of looking at it. Misophonia and hyperacusis can co-occur, right? So that is something that we are beginning to know, and that forms a basis of our brain imaging study and other work we've been doing. Because most frameworks are study these in isolation, they're also treated somewhat separately. So typically, those with hyperacusis are seen by audiologists, and those by misophonia are treated primarily by psychologists and psychiatrists. So there is this very different way of looking at it, which is okay if they were, if so for someone like me who only has hyperacusis and does not have misophonia, that sort of may make sense, and vice versa. But there are lots of us who have both conditions. When they are co-occurring, what happens then, right? So that's something to be also considered. Okay. Okay. So again, as I mentioned, we use MRI and functional MRI, and I wanted to show you that this is the MRI that we use. This is we have used for our present studies. Um, and this is to give you some sense of the pictures that we take of the brain. So this is an imaging structure in the brain. So you see gray and white matter. So it in great detail. So this takes about 5 to 8 minutes of time in the scanner, and we see this gray matter, and the white matter are the connections or roads in our brain. And these are anatomical connections are the white matter, and the gray matter is where there are hubs of processing, where which is we are computing and we are doing the hard work in the brain. Okay. Um, so the next piece I'm going to show you is actually imaging function. This is when we are performing a task in our head, like if you're doing 2 plus 2, or if I'm asking you to listen to a story. Your brain is, your neurons in your brain are firing, and these little flickers of light, I hope you can see it, are representative of blood flow changes in the brain. So the more blood flows into the brain, into a particular region in the brain, when that region is very much engaged, or the neurons or the cells in that region are working really hard. So when these neurons are working really hard, they need oxygen, and that takes in a lot more blood to that region. The oxygen is used by the neurons. It gets depleted. The blood gets depleted of oxygen. The deoxygenated blood then leaves that area, goes back to be oxygenated. What the functional MRI does is it is able to sort of detect these changes in blood. So deoxygenated blood has a magnetic quality, which is then being detected this by this scanner, essentially. And what we do is that we have sped up this film. This is about 15 minutes of scanning, and what you see, each little flicker of light is about 2 seconds. So it's a slow process, but it gives us great detail and understanding of what is happening in the brain, not just at the level of anatomy, but at the level of uh, function, that at the moment I'm thinking of this, and this is what is happening in your brain, right? So for the past 30 years, when functional MRI and MRI has become such an important tool, we don't have to rely only on behavior. We are now able to sort of remove the curtain, right? It's not a, the brain is no longer a black box. And very non-invasively, we can sort of part the curtain, peer into the brain, and see what is happening. So this has been phenomenally, it has changed how we understand the brain. And again, this has occurred since the 1990s for the most part. And so since the 2000s, we've had tremendous progress. Um, so this is very interesting that our this focus on misophonia has paralleled this important focus on the brain and how we are using these sort of more available tools now. So we are sort of going to combine these two. So one technique that we use, apart from looking at anatomy, is what we call resting state fMRI. And what we do here is to look at the sort of this traffic on our roads, right? So what is happening in the connections or coupling? The way we do this is very simple. We have a plus sign or a cross on the screen. Uh, people are resting in the scanner with their eyes open. We ask them to look at it, let their minds wander, their eyes are open, think whatever you want to think. So this is a very, if you imagine, there are no trigger sounds, there is no other sounds except the sound of the MRI scanner, and we use a lot of sound protection. We use like this big headphones, we use the foam earplugs, we're reducing a lot of the scanner noise. And we say, let your mind wander. And then we use advanced data analysis and machine learning as well to figure out what is different between, say, my brain and my neighbor's brain, for instance, right? If we were both participating in the same study. We are trying to look at the coupling in the brain as how are the brain regions talking to each other. We call this functional connections or functional connectivity. If you know anything about statistics, at the heart of it is just looking at correlations. And I'll give you an example here. So we are finding what we say intrinsic. Intrinsic means something that is uh, very much native to your brain. We are not manipulating it in any ways, right? So this is very spontaneous connectivity. And so here is our example. So we have something in red. This is one region of the brain. We have the blue region and we have the green region. And these regions produce these changes in activity that is being detected by the MRI scanner. And this is a time series data. So this is about 6 minutes of activity. And you can see that this activity goes up and down, but sometimes the two activities can go up and down at the same time. So we can see that here at second one and second one, they don't match, so they are not connected to each other. But when you look at the overall, the temporal parietal junction, as well as inferior frontal gyrus activity, you can see that they go up and down at the same time, which leads us to a correlation of about 0.55, which is way higher than the other correlation. So we would then say that these two regions are functionally connected to each other, or they're speaking to each other in your brain, right? So which is very important way of going beyond just saying which regions are active. We're now going one step further is how are they communicating with each other? And this communication or functional connection is very important for understanding different disorders. So that is the heart of what we are trying to do. So some of the regions that we can tell are standard, what we call neural networks, right? These are networks. So you can think about the aviation industry. So you have how the hub and spoke region, like a lot of us will fly from here to Chicago, and then we go out to the rest of the world. You may be flying to Atlanta and going out to the rest of the world. So we have certain hubs in the brain that are like Chicago and Atlanta, and then we have different regions connecting to it. We can also separate out, let's say, different networks. So in the north, and there's networks and different in the south. So we have networks here, which are AUD here means auditory. So these are the two auditory cortices. So this is sort of an image of the brain that is going sort of, if you're slicing the brain, you're going from ear to ear. And this will be the sagittal view. This is a coronal view. You're going from the nose to the back, or we are doing this sort of this horizontal kind of slices through the brain. And this is a horizontal view. And again, when I say this, this is non-invasively. We're just going digging deep into the image volumes that we collect in the MRI. It's just taking pretty pictures of the brain, and then we are trying to understand which regions of the brain are talking to which other regions. So this is the auditory sort of network. This is the dorsal attention network, and this has the regions in the front and the regions in the back of the brain. And that is these regions are where we are attending to something. So hopefully when you're attending to my talk, your dorsal attention network is activated, and this is what is happening. One region that only shows up at rest or when you let your mind wander is what we call the default mode network. This is sort of the idling network, right? When your car is in neutral, this is your brain on neutral or idling. And we call this the default. We shift to when we are not actively doing a task. And this has regions in the front and in the back of the brain, but very much in the center, so very deep inside a brain. And this also becomes important when we consider disorders like misophonia. Okay, so just to remind you, we have attention networks. We have dorsal and ventral attention. Dorsal attention is more like executive control, planning. If you're planning about your lunch, you're planning about how to write a paper, so on. The bottom up ventral attention network is the one that gets alerted when there is a novel stimulus that comes in. So suddenly there's a sound, you alert to it, or there's a something else comes in your vision, and then you pay attention to it. Okay. The limbic system, you may have heard, is about processing of emotions. This is sort of the part of the brain which is sometimes called the lizard brain. It is ancient part of our brain, and this is the fight or flight. This is about feeling emotions deeply. The two regions that keep coming up are about the amygdala, which processes emotions, the hippocampus and the parahippocampus, gyri, which processes memory, right? So this becomes important when we're thinking about emotion processing. To come back to the default mode network, the default mode network was so named in the late 1990s. So it's also fairly new in terms of our understanding of brain and how it functions. The other networks have been known for a fairly long time. And one of the ways the default mode network works is that it monitors external environment. It is for introspection. It thinks about others, which is theory of mind. It thinks about autobiographical memory. For instance, if you smell cookies, it reminds you of your grandma, and so on, right? This is where when we let our mind wander, this network comes online. Uh, One of the things with the default mode and attention networks is they're anti-correlated. So when you're doing a very important task, like you are writing a paper or you're doing an exam, you want your default mode network to be suppressed so that your mind doesn't wander, and instead you're paying attention to the task. So we have this push-pull relationship between the two networks, and this is disrupted outside of young, healthy individuals. So as we age, this gets disrupted. So we're trying to focus, but something else comes in our view as well. The salience network comes up a lot in misophonia research. And again, this is more recently named network in the past 10, 15 years. And here, when we talk about the anti-correlation, this seesaw relationship between the uh, dorsal attention or central executive network, there's another way to say it, and the default mode network is that who is sort of managing it. And one way to think about it is the salience network that comes online and manages this relationship. It's made of the insula, it's composed of the insula, inferior parietal lobule, and some part of the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And it assigns a value for incoming stimuli, and we pay more attention to it if things are more salient to us, right? That's how you're sort of saying, yes, I can pay attention to this because it is more salient to me. Not just that I'm paying attention to it. Okay. A last network that comes up in misophonia research is what we call the somatosensory and motor network. So when we are, feeling our fingers, for instance, the somatosensory network, which is over here, comes online, and when I'm moving my fingers is the motor network which comes here. So this blue part has two parts. One is somatosensory, which is like touch, and then the motor part, which is like, okay, let me pick up a pen, or let me touch my nose, right? So that's the motor network that comes up. Okay, so this has been shown also to be important. So in this case, you have the dorsal attention, the default mode, and the somatomotor. So what we are doing is we are parcellating or dividing different parts of the brain depending on their function. So different parts of the brain are useful for performing different functions. Okay, so coming back to our study, so again, this is led by Shagun, and she's here as well to answer important questions that I may miss. Okay, So to tell you about our study, first we did an online survey. We are a large public university. We have about 50,000 students. We conducted an online survey. We started doing this in 2021, still in the midst of the pandemic and still with a lot of online instruction occurring. We sent out the about 12,000 students. We had 10% completion rate. We had asked them to complete some hyperacusis and some misophonia questionnaires. Depending on their answers, we invited them to join our in-person lab study. We completed audiological assessments in about 142 participants, and then we completed of those structured psychological interview for about 122 participants, and then from there, about 93 participants completed the MRI exam. And this is because, we invite a lot more, and some people didn't want to do the MRI or they didn't fulfill other criteria that we had for the study. The psychological interview and the audiological assessment were used to classify someone as having misophonia, someone is having hyperacusis, and some who have both. Okay, so in our study, this particular paper is focused on those who have misophonia only, without hyperacusis, and those who have both, and healthy controls. And again, we did the resting state fMRI. We developed these functional connectivity maps. We used a machine learning classifier. So I'm not going to go into much detail here, but basically what it does is, without knowing who the person is, it can read these maps and say this belongs to category A and this belongs to category B. And then we go in and look and say, okay, this is more misophonia like, this is more hyperacusis like, and so on. And then we say what allowed this machine to separate between the two. And then we say, okay, these are the regions which allows it to separate between the two, right? So we found that there is some disruptions in how these brain regions are talking to each other. And this was in the executive control regions and the dorsal attention regions. It was in the salience network with the insula, and it was in the motor, somatomotor areas as well. Okay, so that's a punchline of our paper. These were the individuals. We also had individuals who had only hyperacusis. I'm not going to talk about them. We published their information in a separate paper. In this paper, we are talking about 27 young college-going adults. Our age inclusion was between ages of 18 and 25. We wanted it to be very tight because it made our interpretation easier. And when we average these the functional connection maps and their brain imaging data, it makes it easier for us to interpret the findings. This misophonia and hyperacusis was actually 24. We were surprised. It was very difficult for us to recruit hyperacusis only. It was not very difficult to recruit misophonia and misophonia plus hyperacusis. So the prevalence of these disorders is the comorbid prevalence, right, is very high, and that also surprised us. And we had about age, gender, education match. We matched for many different variables, the controls, without either of these conditions. This is some more data about our participants. We have, again, we have these individuals here. They were mostly female, mostly women, young women, but they were matched across. This is the hearing thresholds. Everybody has a very good hearing. They were very, very good hearing. This is highly, they're young and they have good hearing. We found a difference in loudness discomfort levels, which is the lower it is, the more bothered you are by sounds, even softer sounds. That's what it means. So 82 is low. And this is controls 92. I'm not bothered till it reaches 92 decibels. Here someone is saying around 80 is too much for me. Okay, this is hyperacusis score. So above 22 is typically, we would classify someone as having hyperacusis on the Kalfa hyperacusis questionnaire. And so you can see that the comorbid group has very high. They're saying, all sounds bother me, essentially. This is the misophonia questionnaire, the severity subscale, and you can see that those here with MH has more severe misophonia. At that time, the Duke Misophonia Questionnaire was just being published while we're collecting this data, so we could not incorporate that in here yet. In the more recent work, we've incorporated that. So I just wanted to let you know why the DMQ is not present here, was because we already had started collecting data in 2021. This is major depression ratings, and this is about comparable across the three groups. Even our controls had higher, so they had, some of them did have, uh, they have one here, sub-threshold, or in MDD, we had about 5 and above threshold and so on. Okay. And there was some who were unknown, and because we could not get some ratings on them. Okay. So this is a busy slide, and I'll try to explain to you as much as I can, and I leave some to the questions. So in this slide, what we are trying to do is we were trying to come up with what we call machine classifiers. This is machine learning algorithms that we are using. This is a subpart of AI. We are not using AI to create new data. We are not. What we are doing is, can we use it to, without telling our computers who belongs to where, can we just figure things out, right? So we sort of trained it first on the misophonia, and then it was able to classify the people we tested on well, which is good. We then trained it on MH, both misophonia and hyperacusis, and tried to classify those who had misophonia only and those who had controls. And you can see that there is a difference here. And if we just ignore the pink, just look at the blue, you can still see that there's a difference between misophonia only and the controls, right? And this is statistically significant. And then we were trying to see which regions of the brain allowed us to differentiate between the conditions. And here I'm going to, these are the different networks, and these are the connections to the same networks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kind of networks we came up with. And we say, what are the connections between and within these networks? And I want to highlight a few. So again, in the published literature as well as in the study, we found that the salience network is very important. Somatomotor, the subcortical network, I'll come back to in a second, and that was new to our study. We also found the control networks. Again, if you can see that that is very important. So anytime there is a red dot, it means it's very statistically significant for our purposes. We found the default mode network, and then we found the dorsal attention. We didn't find so much the limbic, right here, very one here, and then here we're finding only 2. So we are saying, okay, we're ignoring some of this. And here again, if we just look at the green, and ignore the others, we can see how, which of them, if we are rank ordering them, which of them was the most useful to us. And you can see that the most useful was the control network, which is the dorsal attention, cognitive control network that comes in, then salience network, then the subcortex, then the somatomotor, and so on. So let's look at a bit detail about the subcortex. The subcortex includes a lot of regions not in the upper part of our brain. We found that in here is with the hippocampus, the amygdala, some of that we were looking at. We found that overall connectivity was reduced in the MH group. So the MH group is here in blue. If you have both misophonia and hyperacusis, somehow this connections in this subcortex is reduced compared to misophonia alone. And that may be because of the comorbid hyperacusis condition, right? That is one way to think about it. We are also thinking about the globus pallidus, which shows up here, and the caudate, which is sort of the learning and the basal ganglia. And we are still sort of working our way to understanding it. So one thing I want to tell you is that this is what the data are showing us. We didn't come in with very uh, a priori hypothesis. We have some published work that we could go with, but nobody had looked at the comorbid misophonia and hyperacusis group. And so we are coming in sort of whatever it is, we will understand it and then go with it rather than coming with very much preconceived notions. We had very few preconceived notions when we started the study. So our findings is a first study. We use a very data-driven approach. We didn't go in and say, let's only look at the salience network. We didn't do that. And we said, can we determine at least a subgroup within the larger misophonia population? So to us, the misophonia and hyperacusis as a comorbid group is a large subgroup within the misophonia population. And previous studies have not really done a good job of uh, understanding if someone who is reporting misophonia, do they also have hyperacusis? And as you can see from our results, that changes. That changes a lot of what we are seeing in the brain. Okay, misophonia in general, whether it has hyperacusis or not, but overall misophonia, we can see a salience network, control network, somatomotor, default mode, and then the subcortical regions. Not as much effect of the limbic system, although there was some. Um, and then trying to link some of these networks to behavior, right? So we are finding this cognitive control impairments, and this is a hallmark of both misophonia and misophonia plus hyperacusis. This may be a common trait of misophonia. So Andrada's work here at Duke has also shown this. There is also the somatomotor shows up. This may be related to motor inhibition. So Kumar's paper had talked about this mirroring work, but Heather Hansen's work has reinterpreted this in a different way. So it may be that when someone is chewing, for instance, we may inhibit our own chewing. I don't know. I'm trying to sort of, this is what our fMRI work is showing, and then we are trying to link it and interpret it within the context of the experience of individuals with misophonia. We are seeing also this attention regulation or inflexibility. We're seeing this in frontoparietal region. And again, Andrada has work on it. There was a more recent work from Black et al., which also talk about this they are not as good at emotional regulation, attention regulation. We become very focused on certain sounds and certain behavior, and so maybe that inflexibility is being reflected in these network connections. Um, Influence of hyperacusis, we saw disruptions in networks involved in higher order visual processing. This was exclusively seen in the MH group. We also see this in the hyperacusis only group. Again, as I said, that I'm not talking about that paper. That is a separate paper that we published. In general, in misophonia plus hyperacusis, our take-home message is that misophonia appears to dominate the network connections, but there is a part that can be attributed to those individuals having hyperacusis. But in general, it seems to be dominated by the condition of misophonia. Okay. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the neurophysiological models of hyper. There are several models now of hyperacusis, but this is from Yastreboff, Pavel and Margaret Yastreboff. And so they came up with this model of both hyperacusis and a model of misophonia. Our findings provide some support, but not completely support. So in the case of hyperacusis, the sound comes in, there is a lot of amplification happening in these central auditory pathways. It goes to higher order centers. We activate the limbic system. We have a lot of the same reactions. And this autonomic nervous system is making the heart beat faster and so on, right? In this framework, the condition of misophonia, nothing over here is happening with amplification. What is happening is in the connection between the central auditory pathways and the limbic system, right? And then it sets up this cascade of events or reactions and so on. we are finding more things happening here and less over here. We are still working this out, but that that seems to be the major majority of what we are looking at is happening at this level. Okay. So our take-home message is that there's a high prevalence of co-occurring misophonia and hyperacusis, which we call the MH group. This was a surprise to us when I went in. I wrote the grant as though they would be separate, and the more we recruited participants, we found that they kept having both groups. So we had to go back to the drawing table, so to speak, and then rearrange our funding in a way. This is one of the first studies to use very data driven, that we are letting the data speak to us. We're not going with any preconceived uh, notions about what we expect to find, and we're trying to investigate subgroups here. Both the misophonia and hyperacusis severity were high in the MH group. The misophonia related brain connectivity changes or alterations were more dominant, even though the hyperacusis severity was high. In the presence of trigger sounds, their emotions and emotion processing are more evident. We did not have trigger sounds, and maybe that's why we are not engaging the limbic system as much. We do find this reduced cognitive control. It seems to be a general trait in misophonia. There may be some treatment implications of a study. What are good targets for assessment of treatment changes, right? So let's say you're having a treatment for misophonia. We can do brain imaging pre and post the treatment, and then we can see what changes in the brain, right? So we can develop some hypotheses about that. We can also develop some hypotheses about targets for pharmacological stimulation, like transcranial magnetic stimulation. When comorbid with hyperacusis, which condition should be treated first, right? And to me, the answer is which bothers you the most, right? But I think you need this kind of audiological workup and structured clinical interview in order to figure out which part of the sounds are more bothersome to you, which are affecting your day-to-day lives more, and so on. And I want to thank our funding and our the members of my lab, and obviously our volunteers. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein, for that wonderful presentation. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat or unmute and ask them out loud.
And thank you for your attention. I appreciate that. And again, I'm a beginner. I'm learning about the condition, and I hope to learn alongside you. And so
We have one question in the chat. Is it possible to get better? Any specific strategies or therapies?
I I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I will recuse myself. I do believe that. I do believe fundamentally that it is possible to get better. We have seen a lot of the work, that important work that has been done at Duke and other places. I've attended conferences since 2021 related to misophonia, or sorry, 2019 related to misophonia, and I've seen that. I've seen some of the work that has been done. I've heard testimonials from individuals with misophonia. So I do believe that. Yes.
I have misophonia
Yes.
myself. I can speak to personal experience a little bit. It was a lot worse when I was younger. It has definitely gotten better. And I'm going to put our email in the chat as well if anyone wants to reach out to us to ask more questions about specific treatments or recommendations. I'll be happy to share in more detail. Um, our
Uh,
next question. Oh, no, go ahead.
I wanted to just add to that is that I believe that what we are doing, this kind of brain imaging studies, which are sort of showing what is happening in the brain with different conditions, help us understand that, help us that they validate your lived experiences and say, look, this is what is happening and this is how it is connected. And I think they play an important role in that and demystifying some of these, and then it leads to better treatment outcomes as well. Mm,
Our next question is this condition congenital or develops later in life?
mm. I can tell you from our studies, and we have not looked in the genetics of it, so I'll recuse myself from that portion. But we are currently conducting a international multinational study. So at Illinois here, at in South Korea, in Seoul, and in São Paulo in Brazil. And what that study is doing is very simple. We're inviting individuals with misophonia to come in and do an audiological workup and to do a structured clinical interview using Duke Misophonia questionnaire this time because it's published. And we've done it in 3 different places. We are finding differences in which dominates the age of onset in Korea versus in Brazil versus here. We're also finding individuals who have developed later in life. So I was very surprised that one particular participant in Brazil developed it in their 50s, right? And it was developed because of unique circumstances of their lives, but uh, the majority do develop in early adolescence and when they're younger, it seems to me. But then there is also, I have a colleague here at my university who developed it in her 30s, right? And this was as part of her profession and so which was very different, I think. And it may be that these may have different implications for what we are seeing in the brain. So that would be, I think, would be a very important study to conduct, which is those who have developed it, let's say by the age of 14 or 15, and those who are developing it later in life. So even if I'm imaging them at, let's say, age 50, is it that you developed it at 14 versus 45 will change, right? Will have different changes in your brain, different alterations and different impact. And I think that would be a very important study to conduct at how the age of onset matters as well. But I was surprised again that individuals were developing later in life in the 50s and 60s. That's a small minority compared to the majority who develop. But again, that varies. That seems to be varying by country as well.
Thank you. Our next question is, are the reactions to hyperacusis the same as or similar to misophonia? Do they show up in the same place in the brain?
That's a very good question. We are finding some similarities, but also differences, right? So we said the visual cortex changes come up a lot. So let me remind you about hyperacusis. So hyperacusis is the loudness of all sounds, right? All everyday sounds. So if I go and eat at a restaurant and the background music is too loud, that bothers me, right? For instance, and I don't want to go. It's like going to movies and it's too loud and it triggers my migraine, it gives headaches. So that's all sounds, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be very specific few sounds. So there is no concept of triggers, so to speak, with hyperacusis. It's just all sounds above a certain loudness level. So you can wear different muting headphones, for instance, that lessens the incoming sounds, right? So you can wear that. So the way we adapt to it is also different. Both are sounds, both are external sounds. So in that sense, there is the commonality there. But we don't have one or two sounds that serve as triggers. It's all sounds. Um, the the parts of the brain. So one I can tell you is that about the visual cortex. Um, the visual cortex and how we become more reliable on it, I think, when we have hyperacusis, and we are not seeing that as much with misophonia. So I think there are some fundamental changes that are occurring with it. We have not looked in depth, and there is not much literature. We are, I was trying to look into it in hyperacusis when it's comorbid with autism, for instance, in children, right? And that seems to be a very different field of study than the more general purpose hyperacusis that I'm talking about. But I'm beginning to look into it with a colleague, and we'll see what we find. But yes, in short, there are some differences. We are finding, though, I think the somatomotor is showing up for hyperacusis too, which was very surprising to us because we thought that it would be more unique to misophonia, but somatomotor is showing up as well. I don't know if Shagun has something else to add.
Yes. So, hello everyone. In case of somatomotor, I think the if when I try to explain why that might be coming up in hyperacusis, I think there are behavioral studies that say there are very physical responses that happen when a hyperacusis person is exposed to a loud sound. So, clenching of muscles, things like that. Um, so the motor aspect might actually be related to how your body might be responding towards certain sounds. But it's still a speculation. It's not proven, of course.
Yeah, we are in the infancy of this kind of research, right? And as more of us are doing this research and talking about it and understanding about it, I think it will, yeah, we will know more. I'm very confident that uh, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, uh, we will know so much more. We will know so much more.
Thank you both for your answers. Our next question is, one of your slides mentioned pharmacology. Are there known medications that are helpful?
Not to my knowledge, not to my knowledge. Uh, I am sure there are. I'm sure the Duke Center will be able to help you with that. I have not worked with any kind of interventions yet with either hyperacusis or misophonia. I know that when it is comorbid with migraine, then there are medications that are for migraine, and then that helps with hyperacusis as well in the moment, right? So yes, uh, so one of the things with hyperacusis is that the sensitivity of it is variable. So you can, when you are, it seems to vary with emotions, and it seems to vary, in not yes, with emotions, and it seems to vary with other things that are happening, like sleeplessness or migraine or something like that. So, we are acutely sensitive to sounds and light when you have migraine, for instance, and medications for migraine help in that regard. So I would hesitate to say.
I was just going to add something, Grace, that our group too is clinical psychologists, so a little bit less of our research would be in regards to the pharmacological. But, anecdotally, we hear from lots of different people, certain meds they'll go on, like a Wellbutrin or an SSRI. And some people will say, I notice a big difference. And then opposite, you'll hear from people, I've been on those meds. That's not helping me. They may be, for co-occurring disorders that are going along with it, like depression or anxiety or other things, but it may not necessarily, oh, I'm seeing a difference in my response with misophonia and those kind of reactions. So, but there are some studies going on right now with a few medications out there, but we don't have that data yet to be like, okay, a group of people do seem to do better with a medication at this point.
Mhm.
The
Absolutely.
Misophonia Research Fund just in their last cycle funded a medication study. So hopefully we will see those results in the coming years. And I just wanted to add too that I speak with so many people with misophonia every day in this position. And something I've realized in the past almost 2 years that I've been here is how individual the experience is and how different it is for everyone. And there are co-occurring disorders that happen sometimes, and that really affects how you should approach treatment. And that's why we at CMER recommend an individualized multidisciplinary approach to it because it really is so different for everyone. So something that helped me might not help someone else. It's very individualized, but it is certainly very possible for it to get better.
Mhm. And any of that information, as we add to our knowledge base, it's so helpful, right? Even if we have, like, let's say 10 subgroups within the larger misophonia, but if it helps like five of them, that's such a huge, huge benefit, right? If you multiply by the hundreds and thousands of people who have misophonia and millions perhaps across the world. So, right, even if, so more knowledge is so beneficial here, and we'll see the outcomes of that increased knowledge, I'm thinking, in the near future. So,
Right, we have 2 minutes left, so we can probably take one more question. If anyone wants to put one in the chat, or feel free to unmute your mic as well.
Maybe I have a question very quickly to the SEMER, the Duke SEMER group. So I know, Grace, you talked a little bit about what surprised you was about how individual it is. Is there anything else that surprised you in your learning about this condition, the more you've learned about it?
I think that was the biggest realization for me was when I came into this position, I thought my experience was the experience, but that was not at all true. So many people have different triggers and it affects them in different ways. So that was really shocking to me. Um, but yeah, I think just how different it is for everyone really was the biggest shocker for me. And we continue to learn new things every day since this is really in its infancy. So um, everything that's coming out about it, I find fascinating.
Lisa Lynn, I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Having started in sensory research with Dr. Rosenthal before we were even talking about misophonia, and then now doing misophonia work, it is exactly as Grace said. I'm glad to know that we are still looking to do research now as we're still learning about this, because people want help now. So there's this constant battle we don't quite know, but let's use some evidence-based things that we do know that could be helpful to people and keep pushing because again, there's too many people who've been suffering with it for a long time and, didn't know what it was. And we still meet people all the time who are just like, I didn't know what this was and having to talk to people and do the Duke Misophonia interview with random people all the way around the country who don't know about misophonia. There's a lot of people too affected by sounds in general, so speaking about sound sensitivity too, there's so much room for help and then the impact. So I just appreciate people willing to be part of our research and do what we're doing. Wish we could do this with bigger amount of funds too. So hopefully this will keep growing and we can get more support and be able to do more studies around the country. So we don't have to try to ask people to fly in from all around to come to Duke. I feel so bad because there's not extra funding to pay for those things, so.
I agree 100%. And I think one of the things is at least our study, even before the publication, I think we did a little good in that we gave a name to the disorders people had because a lot of with the participants we included in a study didn't know they had misophonia, right? So I would talk to colleagues and say, this is what I'm doing. And I said, you can go online and take this little survey to see. And 3 or 4 of them qualified. And these are individuals my age, right? We're middle age. And they're like, oh, learning about this that they've had for such a long time and they didn't have words for it, right? And so it helped them. It helped them figure out why this was such a constant annoyance of their everyday life, why they didn't go to seminars over lunch, right? So a lot of the people are like already are doing this avoiding behavior and didn't quite realize it, right? When we are in here at the university, we have a lot of lectures over lunch. And so people, it didn't occur to them that this is why I'm doing it. And this is now. So for what it's worth. That was like the thing. But thank you. I agree 100% with what you said about how important the volunteers have been for this and for any study.
We are 2 minutes over time, but one more thing I
Yes.
will say that also surprised me is the effect that it has on the entire family, not just the person who has misophonia. I know I saw it with my parents, but I think seeing it with so many families has really opened my eyes, and I see my parents and my siblings in a different light now, and realizing how much it affected them, not just me. So my heart really goes out to everyone on this call and everyone who eventually watched this recording who is in a family with misophonia because it certainly affects everyone. And we deeply appreciate your efforts to help your loved ones and be there for them.
Mhm.
But
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Dr. Hussein. This is a great presentation. And everyone, please feel free to reach out to our email with any more questions or anything. And we will see you all soon. And this will be sent out in the next couple weeks to everyone who was registered.
Thank you so much. Thank
Have
you.
a great day, everyone.